right, everybody, if we could wrap up our conversations and find our seats. I'm going to begin the next panel. So this is our lunchtime panel. We kind of imagined that we would have an opportunity to share a meal and also share some inspiration with our two guests this afternoon. First up, we have Ms. Vicki Preston. She is the Cultural Resources Technician for the Karuk tribe. And we also have here Ms. Jennifer Dyer. She is the US Six Rivers Heritage Program Manager. And together, they work on a collaborative approach to wildfire management and forestry management in Northern California and Southern Oregon, or Northern California. Okay, so without further ado, today our guests are going to describe the work that they're completing and also the opportunity to share cultural knowledge and advancement through the U.S. Forest Service engaging with Native tribes and kind of the shift in that management scheme and where that leaves us. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's just start by introducing myself a little bit. My name is Vicki Preston. I work for the Karuk tribe as a cultural resources technician under the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer in Orleans, California at the Department of Natural Resources. So I don't know if you know where Orleans is, but it's a very small town in far northern California on the border of Humboldt County and Siskiyou County. Like 650 people. It's like all very forested, so it's all like very rural. So that's where I grew up and work now, and that is the Aboriginal territory of the Karuk tribe. And I went to UC Berkeley and studied Native American Studies, and I'm back home now working and just got kind of started in archaeology in the last few years. Had no really previous history with it, so a lot of this was just like learned through this job and with Jen. So.
Hi everyone, my name is Jennifer Dyer. I'm the Heritage Program Manager on Six Rivers. And just a very brief background on my professional career. I started with the Forest Service in New Mexico in 2001. Have kind of worked in archaeology my whole career, mostly on districts, and then in 2014, I came out to California to Six Rivers National Forest, and the Heritage Program Manager, basically, it's another, that's Forest Service code for forest archaeologist, and then also working very closely with the tribes in Northern California in my role with Six Rivers, and then in the past in New Mexico, I worked very closely with several Pueblo groups, and in the last 16 years, my career with the Forest Service, there's been a lot of fire and working with tribes, and so this is a real passion of mine, and I look forward to sharing a little bit of what we're doing in Orleans, and I think it's a real strong model for how we can move forward and a different way of looking at fire and living with fire.
So hopefully the clicker, yay, it works. I'm going to talk about the project that we kind of came together on, which is the Western Klamath Restoration Partnership, also known as WKRP, so it's a little catchy lingo. And that was started probably around 2013 when the groups kind of all got together and got the funding to do it, and it's a collaboration between the Forest Service, which is Six Rivers and Klamath National Forest, the Karuk tribe, the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council, and other local nonprofits in the kind of Mid-Klamath Basin, as well as the public. And there's a strong public element with private landowners also being on the boards and being at a lot of the meetings as well. And our kind of chose to show our shared values that within the last so many years working within WKRP was all agreed upon with this group in the kind of heart of collaboration, realizing that with the history that a lot of these groups have had in the area, that we felt strongly the need to all have a set agreed upon kind of shared values to kind of ground us and maybe work from there, with this goal of large management restoration, strongly driven by this need to restore fire to the Mid-Klamath watershed due to the fact that we have a history of wildfire where we're from. As long as I have lived there, there's always been wildfire, and has always been a lot of opinions about it, I suppose. So I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, so I think, early on, there was a lot of effort in coming up with some shared values, because in the past, these groups, it's a pretty diverse, set of entities, and a lot of the past has been, there's been a real adversarial relationship, and so this was kind of an attempt to come up with where do we agree, and really, I think what I've seen is that the whole group is really coming together around fire and these shared values. There's a lot to fire and a lot to a community-based project, and it kind of, I think, has really expanded everyone's idea of what we can do together when we actually are working together and owning something together.
Yeah, and I think that through restoring prescribed fire, through restoring cultural fire in the tribal perspective, that we were hoping that we could maybe hit on all of these shared values, like the sustaining local economies, healthy river systems. So, and this is kind of just, in case no one knows where Orleans is, it's that little dot kind of up there. I don't know if this thing works, but it's like pretty close to the Oregon border. So we do share a lot of characteristics with like that southern Oregon area, but it's very rural, very mountainous, very steep. And this is our WKRP, the pilot project within the Six Rivers National Forest around the Somes Bar, California area. And these are the different focal areas that we've been working with the last few years, basically. And then within the WKRP landscape, it's 1.2 million acres. And then within these focal areas, it's about 5,500 acres. So these are pretty large scale projects that we're hoping to accomplish to restore fire to pretty much the whole of those red areas. The goal is to restore fire to the whole thing. And as you can see here, there's the private properties within the focal areas that have been one of the main focuses of WKRP, is protecting private properties from wildfire. In a lot of these areas, actually seeing wildfire this year in this area right here. So having some protection around these homes is one of the main tenets of WKRP. Living in a strong wildfire landscape and protecting those ingress-egress routes and stuff. So I don't know if you want to see more about the map. And then this is the Karuk Aboriginal Territory in pink, with the focal areas right here, the small green ones. So you can kind of see that as far as how WKRP is concerned, it is at the heart of the Karuk universe, at the center of our world. So it's near the confluence of the Klamath and Salmon rivers. So definitely the Karuk tribe, and being partners with WKRP, they had a very strong investment in these places. And it's been one of the reasons that I think it's been really nice to work with in the process pretty collaboratively the whole way through. A lot of this is all, this whole area has a lot of tribal history and stuff. It still maintains a lot of living culture. So, and a strong driver within WKRP was what a lot of people have talked about today, is that history of fire exclusion was definitely something that we feel very strongly in our area, like the fuel loading and the brush that we have to deal with leaves a lot of our territory fairly inaccessible, besides the fact that it's really steep, but really inaccessible and a lot to manage, and very heavy fuels. And yeah, and you kind of look at historical maps, which I don't have here, of like the encroachment of certain species to like fur into a lot of these areas that might have been once grassland, and to see like the spread of like invasive weeds that have kind of really taken over after fire exclusion. These are a lot of reasons why we really feel the need to bring fire back. And also the fact that wildfire, when it hits these places with lots of fuel loading, we see a lot of threat to homes, threats to, archaeological sites in certain areas. And we're talking about like really hot fire, but also that it keeps, as far as cultural fire, it keeps people from, it doesn't allow us to do the cultural burns that we might want to do, because having to work within burn windows when there's already heavy smoke or a lot of wildfire going on, it's hard to do, cultural burns to allow the tribe to do what they would like to be doing during this time when it's not possible. Maybe the smoke's too heavy or something, or maybe this has been something that we would like to burn a certain type of way, but it's not gonna happen because a large wildfire went through and it wasn't maybe not burned the way that we might want it to be burned. So, and then along with fire exclusion, it kind of it ties into this history of mistrust that has been built up between a lot of the private or tribal communities and some of the public land management, the Forest Service communities that have had kind of like what Jen was saying, this adversarial relationship for many years of you can't do this, you can do this. So I think that through WKRP, there's been like this, we should all kind of work it out together. We all know that we want to do this. We all know that we want to restore fire and that we think it would be really beneficial to this forest and the health of it and the health of the people. So it's been having to work through all that and kind of come to terms with a lot of things has been a major part of WKRP. So. Yeah, and collaboration, and me and Jen are here together, so I think it's been very collaborative. Working, sometimes working very much in their office and our office, and just really communicating on the daily about what we need to get done, and all realizing that we all have like this really strong, intense need to do this. So. And kind of embracing that we're not always going to agree also within these rooms, and that's being like one of the major things that we sometimes we all sit there and we're like, we're not agreeing on this. So that's definitely brings us to having a lot of discussions and a lot of like breaks and okay, let's cool down, So, but feeling this need that we definitely have to work through this if it's something that's before we can move on. So, so that's been really appreciated.
And just to kind of tag on to what Vicki just said, I think one of the things that, from a Forest Service, perspective, is that collaboration. It sounds good, and it's actually really hard to do. And it's, I think, the Forest Service, with all of the Forest Service fire policy of the last 100 years, where it's all about suppression and putting the fire out, the 10 a.m. policy, and now with all these WUIs, wildland urban interfaces and homes and the politics and the smoke impacts. I mean, there's so much complexity to fire management, and but really where I think that WKRP has hit on something good, and like I said, I think as a model, is that if the Forest Service in particular comes into those collaboratives with the idea that we're not the experts in the room, there's a lot of experts, and there's a lot of local knowledge and a lot of really to listen more than to tell these communities what's best for them, and that's taking kind of a little bit of a back seat maybe in some instances, and really understanding what those shared values are, and spending some time in building those relationships, building some trust, because like Vicki said, it's not like it's going to be easy, even if we all come into it with a a lot of interest in working together, there's still going to be some things that we don't all agree on, and figuring out where those shared values are, realizing that, especially from the Forest Service, the federal government perspective, we're not necessarily the authority or the experts always, to kind of give some of that that opportunity to really learn from each other and build something together, I think is where WKRP is really taking collaboration to and actually really doing it and not just having a new label. And this is, it's collaboration, but really the Forest Service is still doing the same thing they've always done. This is really taking it and kind of seeing where it leads us and letting the community kind of tell us where the most important places to focus on and really learning from their knowledge and their intimate knowledge of those areas that we want to do good work in.
Yeah, and just to say that, I don't know if I said this, but that the Karuk tribe doesn't have like a reservation land. It owns parcels of tribal land, but most of the Karuk Aboriginal territory is all on public land owned by the Six Rivers and Klamath National Forests. To give some context as to, it's definitely really important, the collaboration, considering there's like these multiple investments from different ways, and then the public properties within those lands, and then the different nonprofits and other organizations who also have different stakes at those places too. Have you stand in one spot in the forest and have like 5 different opinions about, and then what should happen. So that's when all the talking really happens, and you get out in the field with everybody, and that's when it's like, okay, now what do you guys see? And we're all like talking about it. So like this picture, for example, thought it looks pretty collaborative, and it's remember being in there that day. It was a really large sugar pine with a really large tan-oak grove, and just seeing the beauty and like keeping those two things together culturally in that area was something that through WKRP we would maybe mention and say that this is like a priority area for fire. So because of the way that these trees grow and their characteristics, and the fact that those trees themselves are probably over 100 years old, and we're here pre-fire suppression. So just wanted to explain that picture again a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So the shared values are kind of those principles that we all agree on in this collaborative, and then the zones of agreement are a little bit more of the actually, so how do we take those principles and put them into practice? And we're going to touch on kind of the ones that we've been most invested in and focused on because of the Vicki's role in working for the tribe and being a part of the cultural and archaeological crew that we've been working together with for several years now. But really to kind of just back up a second with, there are quite a few zones of agreement, and so that's kind of where this pilot project, we're gonna put those into practice and hopefully learn together. And the big thing, though, that because we're in Karuk territory and it's really their past fire management practices are things we're looking, really wanting to incorporate into our contemporary management, because the Forest Service policy of fire suppression and exclusion really has been pretty, short-sighted, and has really led to a lot of unhealthy forest conditions, is that we are really a central tenet of WKRP is to incorporate traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK, into our work. And so we have these zones of agreement. The ones we're going to kind of focus on will really the last one is kind of one we wanted to kind of share with you today, which is this targeted fuels treatments for cultural and ecological resource benefits to protect tribal practices dependent on the use of fire as a land management tool, and to preserve plant and animal species that depend on habitats maintained by frequent fires. Thank you. And so one of the ways we're trying to better understand TEK and incorporate TEK into the WKRP project is that we have done for the last few years now an integrated archaeology and culture and tribal crew that goes out into the forests, and for any project the Forest Service does on our lands, we do an archeological survey beforehand. Well, in this case, we have incorporated our tribal partners to help us to identify cultural resources on the landscape. And a big reason we're doing that is, like I said before, we're trying to, utilize indigenous science in our development of our project, but also to really understand what the tribal values and to do a more meaningful archaeological survey. And so when we go out to record sites, we're actually able to, with the tribal perspective and with that tribal knowledge, we're able to better understand the context of what we're finding out on the ground. And archaeologists are really good at finding things, but then the question is, well, okay, what do we, what is the significance and the broader associations and the context and the connectedness of, where you are on the landscape, and better understanding what those places were used for in the past, what their, the contemporary use of those places, because these are, this landscape has been actively managed for millennia. And it's just been in the last 100 years that the Forest Service has, really kind of put their brand of management onto it. And we're trying to now kind of get back to some of the things that have really been tried and true in the past. And the tribal input and knowledge and those traditional practices are really critical to us, maybe doing a little bit better stewardship of this cultural landscape. And, the tribe has been very open and really helping to broaden our understanding and not just look at those things on the ground, but actually look at the whole landscape and start to see some of these natural features or trees that if you look at them and know what you're looking for, you'll start to see some of the evidence. Those also are artifacts of some of the past management practices, especially like fire management. And that's exactly what we're trying to restore. And so the tribe is really helping us to come up with a way to restore fire to enhance cultural and natural resources on this landscape.
Yes. I definitely, starting with the field crews and learning a lot from each other was definitely one of the things I took away from it. When we walked into the places and seeing, maybe finding something archaeological, but then, also noticing like, oh, it's here because of, the area. When we look around, you look around, like a lot of people, they were like, oh, you're archaeologists, you just kind of like look at you walk around with your nose in the ground. And it's like, well, we're like, also, I was like looking around and stuff and like, oh, it's the trees, that's why that's here. Like when you look around and you're like, well, this is a tan oak grove, of course they were here. We're right above that village, and it's the trails that we recorded on the way here are directly leading to this site. So this is somebody's gathering site. And when we were kind of hiking and stuff, it was really cool to come across places that maybe through fire exclusion looked a certain type of way, maybe looked very brushy or there were plantations, and maybe what you would imagine wouldn't look like maybe 100 years ago what it had looked like. but to kind of like think about what, through finding these little snippets of artifacts or these few trees that might have been left, really imagining like what it, thinking about using the archaeology to inform, and that was how it was informing WKRP. What could it look like maybe again? Maybe these few black oak trees that are still holding on is what maybe we would like to manage for, especially because whoever was here in the past, really, this looks like this was what they were using this place for. Maybe that's what we should be managing for. So really like walking around and really kind of thinking like that, and using the archaeology, but also using the TEK to really paint a full picture of like what the places we were going could really be and look like. And as we were hiking, it was surveying, but it was also really like just getting a lay of the land, and really, and when we like surveyed, we surveyed like every little bit of those areas. I just remember like, you know, like look pretty gnarly, and just like hiking around in the brush and the, you know, sliding down the hill and stuff. So it was pretty gnarly, but it was really cool to see all those places that, you know, like maybe it wasn't this gnarly before. Maybe we should really think about that, and like what this is why there was fire here, because if this was back to maybe the way it had looked or could look or would ideally like to be, then we could see why people were burning these places, why you would want to burn the acorns here in a certain time of year, so that you would want to come gather here. And we always would continuously tell the crew, like, you know, you hike a long ways to get here, but so this is why you were managing your landscape from your village, and it made it worth your hike to get up there, and you know worth your kids' hike and your family's hike to get up there. So this was kind of like the mindset that we were using as we were doing our surveys, and constantly thinking of that, you know, and which is what I thought was really special about the integrated crews. Mm-hmm. And then them teaching us a lot about traditional archaeology in the sense of like how it's been done in the field for a while, and then us kind of not having a lot of traditional archaeology background, but learning that, and then saying like, I also see this here, like, or the winds blow from the east at this time of day, like that's kind of special, right? And that would really be informing like what kind of fire we'd be laying down here, you know, now and then back then, right? So that's kind of a lot of stuff that we were looking at, and it felt like archaeology, but also felt like different too. So
yeah, I would definitely echo. It's archaeology, so we're meeting all of our compliance requirements and the Archeological Survey requirements for a project of this type, but really the objective wasn't just so that we could mitigate or minimize any negative or adverse effects. This was actually, you know, putting cultural resources on par with the natural resources, and really looking at, okay, the purpose of this project is to restore fire, to enhance these places, and these sites are still being used, and so how can we restore that site function and that access issue that, you know, if it's really hard for us to get through because it's so brushy, well, the animals and anybody else and people who want to come here, these places, you know, we need to take care of them. And so the idea of walking the mile together, I just feel like, you know, it had so many values on so many levels to have this integrated crew, because we were cross-training, we were doing the, you know, typical traditional archaeological methodology of survey of, you know, very systematic transects, but then having that expertise from the tribal side to help to really, you know, give a fuller picture of what this landscape, the past activities and then contemporary activities, and having those living traditions and having that being out in the field and having the landscape help to inform some of those discussions. We gathered some amazing data, but also just built some really, you know, strong friendships and relationships, and a lot of those discussions are still ongoing of, you know, what does right look like, and how do we, you know, kind of, you know, keep this going and do good work together, and the stewardship principles that you know are, it's complex, there's no doubt about it. And but really relying on that TEK and really relying on indigenous science and not just that, Western science bias that, the Forest Service, that authority in the room. It's like, well, wait a minute. There's actually a lot of different ways of knowing and different ways that we could approach this, and the community-based and collaborative-based, and then having this, strong tribal input, and it really is going to be, we're building something a lot richer than any one entity could do, and so it's pretty exciting, I guess, from my perspective. And then, yes, so one of the things that Vicki's reminding me that we, our survey protocol, we collaboratively created a new form called a TEK form to help to capture some of this information that the tribe was helping us to better understand what we were seeing out in the forest, and so it's in addition to our standard archaeological site recordation forms, and it really does help to better understand some of the cultural use species, some of the past management, some of the benefits of how we can bring fire back, and some of those stewardship principles that how we can best enhance, these cultural and natural resources. Mm-hmm. And some of the ideas too are just even getting some data on how accessible are these places, because some of our elders, we want to enhance some of these gathering areas, but maybe there's certain ones that would be best prioritized because they're closer to a current road, or they're going to be easier for to actually be utilized in the future.
Yeah, sorry for going over time a little, but yeah, I think one of the things that I really felt was really successful was the creation of the TEK form in companionship with the DPR forms, the California State site forms that are the way that you record archaeological sites. That when you're doing, if you do firework and that pops up, then that's a protected site. And then having all those kind of have the TEK form included was kind of our way of like showing a lot of the traditional ecological knowledge, a lot of the cultural history and tribal importance, and like the gathering knowledge of that site. And yeah, like Jem was saying, like the accessibility, like we really were like this, the mushrooms here, this is this specific site. So if you were doing fire management, maybe you'd be more cautious to run a dozer or create hand line through there. Maybe you wouldn't want to disturb the mycelium. Maybe just kind of like having those be there to inform people, we felt like was maybe for firework, really informative and places that we would want to protect, but also for WKRP work, maybe we wouldn't be, disturbing the ground as much in those places. So it was really important for us to get out and see it with our eyes and see that part of it, and then include it with the site forms in those packets that were, so now when we go, you flip through site records 50, 25 years later, those will be there with the site forms. So it's, we all know it's really important to have things documented, and I felt like it was really important to have those be there with it, and to have, and have the tribal people, like having us had done that work as a tribal person on tribal land, and that's like not always the case when you flip through Forest Service site records. So I felt like that was really successful.
So, I think what I've learned with working with tribes, and especially in California, is that there's a real difference in how, or there's more to fire than, just like definitely than to the Smokey Bear message and fire exclusion and catastrophic wildfire. Everything is, catastrophic when we talk about wildfire in the news, and, even Forest Service managers a lot of times fall into that. And, just kind of remembering that there's a lot of good, there's a lot that fire, it really is a restoration tool. It can even be considered medicine for these sick forests, and but it's definitely now the challenge is that first pulse of fire. Now that we've excluded fire for 100 years, these are fire-starved forests now, and you're going to have that burden, I guess, of how do we bring fire back and bring it back in a positive way, but really for long-term purposes, we do need to figure that out and do it in a way that is respecting the power of fire, but also, figuring out when is it, those shoulder seasons when we can actually get fire back into these areas and have less high-intensity fire. And the restoring fire to enhance a cultural landscape, to me, it's really another part of kind of shifting the paradigm away from fire exclusion. Is we need fire, and fire has a lot of benefits to these landscapes and the cultural resources, natural resources, if it's low intensity fire. And a lot of our wildfires on public lands, you might not realize it in the news, but we do, on 6 rivers this year, I was looking at our intensity maps. Only 4% of the acreage was high intensity. 2 years ago, in 2015, we also had a big active fire year. Same thing, about 4% was high intensity, and it was mostly up on the peaks and up on the upper third slopes of those mountains. And so just to remember, even in those really big, it seems like we have all this fire and don't get me wrong, there's a lot, we do have loss of properties and human life is the biggest concern, of course. But we also have to remember that there's a lot that fire brings back, and it's really, we just have to kind of somehow figure out how to bring it back on our terms, because it's inevitable. It's going to happen one way or another.
Yeah.
And just to kind of cover, for archaeology on public lands, we do have the National Historic Preservation Act. We do kind of in WKRP, like I said earlier, it's not all about just mitigating adverse or potentially adverse effects. We're actually trying to sustain living traditions, and that is one of the intents of the Historic Preservation Act. Sometimes archaeologists get so focused on the things, they forget about the people. and when we have, living traditions and places that are still being used in those same traditional ways, it's really important to work with the tribes and to see those places a little bit through their lens and see how from their perspective, that if we do nothing in those places, if we just flag them off and avoid them, well, that's the adverse effect. The no action is really not a good option, and really we do need to get back to active management and taking care of those places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the importance of of having our sites be one of the well, we should treat this with fire, maybe. That's one of the things that we find ourselves saying a lot. And I kind of picked an example of one, which is the Tishanna village site near Orleans, as a place that has received fire recently, and it is on the National Register of Historic Places. And not meaning in a lot of archaeology, yeah, it's very oh, don't touch, don't disturb. It's kind of mindset of preserving the past can sometimes mean almost like in amber or something. But in a way, because we are a living culture, because the tribe is still having ceremonies here, still gathering here, still living in and around this area, pretty lively and doing their daily thing, that these places that other people might see as this is historic, you need to leave it as is. When we're actively going there, we would like to continue the management and having, maybe that would be prescribed fire here in these places. So Tishanna is been pretty, this was during this was last year's Trex burn, a training exchange burn, which puts prescribed fire back on private lands mostly, but some public lands in our area. So it's been pretty regularly burned the last few years, which has been really good because, one, it protects the town from wildfire, which it did receive, which was started at Tishanna in 2013 in this area. And because of the fuel loading and the dryness and the drought, did spread and burn some structures within the town of Orleans. So it's important to have that safe buffer, but it's also a cultural village site, and it's a gathering area. So to make sure that it's accessible to the public, to the tribal people for gathering, to make sure there's not invasives there, to make sure the blackberries and then everything that would keep you out of there is at bay, because you find yourself not being accessible to these places after a while. It has has negative effects on the people in various ways. The bottom picture is a field trip that we took with the elementary school kids this spring, and that burn was last October. So we went out and we got bulbs there, and we ate them with the kids, the Indian potato bulbs. So, and we're kind of showing the kids like certain areas of this place, you know, we really like have seen positive management. We want to keep these places going. This was a village site. This was people's food every day. They would come here and do this. So, and what little we can do now is helping. We can keep the invasives at bay. If we can keep the accessibility open so that you guys can come down here, you know, telling the kids this, so that we can all come down here and be healthy, go for a nice walk, eat food that's good for us, and get out and see, you know, having eyes on your world around you teaches you a lot. And so we had brought the kids to the Trex burn last year. The food security team brought the kids to the Trex burn at Tishanna, so it was nice to bring them back in the spring to then gather and dig their own bulbs, and then they ate them, and to show them kind of this, like, this is when you were traditionally your village, you would manage it in this way, and this is what it provides for you. So, and getting out and creating those relationships with each other, you know, throughout the year. So, and that kind of just showing that these historic places can be managed. So, like, not just saying like, okay, well, it's closed off then because it's too special to touch. It's like, maybe it's like those places that, which just means that we need to figure out how we're going to move around in it. So, and that they are special. The tribe agrees that they're special. So, yeah, I think that we also just wanted to talk more about I kind of want to touch on the subject of good fire, because in a lot of the talks we were talking a lot about catastrophic fire, which is something that we do feel in our home. We do feel like the threat of fire on homes and stuff. But we also, as the tribe, we acknowledge that we do live with fire, and there's a lot of different kinds of fire in the world, not just wildfire. You know, most of our homes are all wood fires. We have ceremonial burns. We have management burns, like traditional burns. We have ceremonial fires, which is another way to look at fire for ceremonies, and we have specific fires that are only lit, you know, by certain people during certain times. So it's a really complex thing. It's hard to look at fire as like one kind of thing when there's so many different, it's like having many meanings for the one word. There's many words for this, and what you do around it. And in our community, we do have many different ways we interact with it, from like having the wildfires or prescribed fires for our bear grass gathering, to the hazel that was in those other pictures for baby baskets, and then the acorns so that your acorns are good and less buggy, to having warming fires, and to cooking around fires, and then having those ceremonial fires. Like it's really complicated, and in most of the ways, as far as the tribe sees, most of these ways are pretty positive. So it's, you know, not to also remember that part of it, which in a lot of like wildland fire or other things, it can seem really threatening at times, but we also want to acknowledge that it's also very vital and important to who we are as a living culture to, and is part of maintaining our culture, is to not exclude fire, because it's definitely like very pervasive and is part of, and is symbolic for who we are. So, and it's healthy. So, you know, the health of not just us, but the fisheries, the plants, you know, they all kind of have lived within this fire landscape for many generations, so they all can kind of feel the impacts as well, our watersheds and everything. So to not forget that a large part of, like, we all have to, the collaborative between the different agencies, but also there's collaborative of like for us, the Karuk people, like maybe your acorns and your fisheries, and losing those things is like losing your collaborators, your partners. So, so yeah.
Nice. And we, I think, have run out of time, so I will try to, this slide, really, we just wanted to kind of share, our summer has been fire. Both Vicki and I have been working on the fire line for the last 2 months, I'd say. And a big part of well, really all of our fires this year on 6 rivers, with the exception of one in the south area, was all in this WKRP area, just kind of east of those communities that we're planning this pilot project around. And so we really, it was a pretty amazing summer dealing with, you know, working with a lot of incident management teams, and I was a resource advisor, and we had Vicki as our heritage consultant and others, and it was a really, I would say, very positive summer in that we really were trying to, as much as we could, incorporate some of these WKRP values in our interactions and our management with, you know, working with these incident management teams and the firefighters on the line to try to help them to put in lines in a way that wasn't going to damage archaeological resources and cultural resources or minimize impacts, and really, as much as possible, trying to allow fire to come back in and do a lot of the cleanup in an area that had burned a little under 10 years ago. And so, like I said before, you know, we did have some hot places this summer with about 4% of the acreage was high intensity, but a huge amount was low intensity, and really I would think that we'll go back into those areas and be really pleased with the results of what the fire brought us this year. These are lightning fires that we were working and managing, and so I just feel like, you know, the WKRP project, even though our plan was to start around the communities and then go out to the larger landscape, we're already, you know, with lightning and other variables, having to maybe shift gears and focus on these other places, but trying to bring some of the information we've learned and the ideas of what are the values at risk and what's appropriate management look like. And, you know, a lot of times fire is not the biggest threat, it's what we do. And, you know, with the dozers and the, you know, just all the suppression impacts are you know, really a big factor in how we're looking at what those costs are with wildfire.
Yeah, and acknowledging that that within this area, within the area that these fires roll through, that I'm sure, like all over the country, but definitely where we're at, that there's sites everywhere. The whole area is technically a site in our eyes, but that you find stuff everywhere. There's sites everywhere, and signs of traditional fire management, you know, that we found in a lot of these places that that through our work with the wildland fire are definitely going to help inform us with our prescribed fire, identifying the ridges and the strategic features. And this work is helping us with our WKRP work as well, and kind of expanding on it, an opportunity to expand on that in a way. So
Yeah.
yeah, and then we just wanted to end with this quote from Bill, that managing fire and forests is a community endeavor, always has been and always will be. So, and we feel that with all of this firework, and if you've ever used fire yourself, or if you've ever worked with fire, you know it's a community endeavor, and then everybody has something at stake, and yeah, is there anything else?
Well, and yeah, there's just always going to be a
but-
diversity of thought around fire, and so yeah, figuring it out together as a community seems like a good way to go.
And just to say that I really appreciate all the help from the collaborators, from Bill Tripp and with the tribe, and with DNR, and with the Forest Service, and with Jen. That it really is a community effort. I'm like the little tiny worker ant amongst all these other bugs. There's like a lot of little moving parts. So and just ending with like the renewal of the resources with the acorns, and with the children, thinking about the future, but also like the basket materials that they are carried in, that are fire managed plants. So just to leave it with that, and to think about what the future would look like. So
Yeah, thank you.
thank you.